My name is Brian van Vuuren and I'm a software developer with a PhD in industrial engineering and more specifically operations research. I think the formal definition of operations research is the use of mathematical analysis in order to aid in the decision-making process given a problem. Whenever I explain operations research, I like to use the analogy of linear programming. I think most people did linear programming at some or other stage of high school. And really what linear programming is given two variables, for example, two products in a shop, and an objective function, for example, what's the maximum number of products I can buy with the money that I have, and finding a way to best select those products in order to achieve that objective. That for me is really the fundamental of operations research. It's using mathematical approaches in order to model situations subject to constraints and choose variables or processes or arrangements that best suit the given problem space in order to come up with an optimal or a near optimal solution. And that's kind of the simplest form of operations research, and it just builds from that concept on. For example, instead of 2 products, maybe you're trying to choose among 10 products, and instead of 3 constraints, perhaps you've got 30 constraints. And so as these get more complicated, so we require more sophisticated techniques of solving these kinds of problems. And it goes even further to when problems become too big or too complex to solve by hand. We use kind of frameworks and techniques in order to process problems to allow the computer to make those decisions and infer how the variables interact with each other to propose good quality solutions. And so operations research for me is that field where you're dealing with the selection of variables, adhering to constraints, and what's the best way to make that selection. My research specifically was in simulation modeling, and it's a really great illustration that operations research is applicable kind of across the board. My research was actually to do with sugarcane, where there exists an insect, a stalk borer called Eldana saccharina walker. And what happens is the pest lays its eggs in sugarcane fields, and as the eggs hatch, the larvae then enter the stalks of sugarcane and feed inside the sugarcane stalks. While the larvae are feeding on the stalk, they actually hollow out those sugarcane stalks. And so when it comes to harvest and squeezing that sugarcane in order to refine the sucrose and make sugar, the yield is significantly lower, billions of rands. And kind of the next obvious phase of the research was to try and build a model which accurately captured the behavior of this pest. So computer simulation modeling is kind of the process of taking a real-world system and attempting to abstract it and build a computer-based representation of that system. Typically it's a lot cheaper to experiment, a lot quicker to experiment on a computer-based model of the system than it is in real life, and a lot less disruptive. So by having a computer-based approximation of a swarm of Eldana saccharina in sugarcane and how it behaves, the idea was then to be able to test various approaches, for example, spraying of pesticides, how frequently should pesticides be sprayed, how much should be sprayed in order to best control the pest. So simulation modeling was a way to speed the process up, to hopefully save some money, and to also develop creative techniques to dealing with this really destructive pest. I think operations research is actually part of everyone's day-to-day life, but very few people realize that they're actually working in that space. Operations research offers you an interesting and diverse perspective on solving real-world problems using the concepts of mathematics and data.